Thank you very much for coming today. I'm thrilled to be here in Kiev with all of you. I'm going to give you a little bit of context for why I do this rich thinking research in the first place, so that maybe you understand a little bit more about me and what I'm up to. And then I hope to understand a little bit more about you by the end of this session as well. It's my first time in Ukraine, and I do global research. So I plan to be asking you some questions today so that I can make my visit as worthwhile as possible. So consider yourselves research subjects, okay? If you will humor me, I'd really appreciate it. So we can make this as informal as you like. If you want to ask me questions as we go through, that's okay. Otherwise, I will pause a couple of times and just open it up to questions. So first of all, let me tell you why I'm doing this research. I travel all over the world. It's my passion. I've been doing it for nearly 10 years now. I've been a portfolio manager and a CFA charter holder for a long time. I've been in the industry 25 years. Yeah, it's a long time. Anyway, why I started it was in the financial crisis. I didn't want to talk to my clients. I was in the business of giving investment advice, and nobody was happy. So I don't like it when my clients are unhappy. How many people here have customers of one form or another? Raise your hand. Do you have customers? Are you in the asset management business? Okay. How many people are CFA charter holders? Candidates for the CFA? Yeah. Okay. So I didn't want to talk to my customers, and they didn't want to talk to me, and I started getting kind of depressed because also I wasn't making any money and the environment was horrible. Anybody who worked during the financial crisis knows that. So I can get pretty introverted when I feel down, and I would go home at night and just read. That's what I like to do, and just kind of like read and read and read and read. And I started reading everything I could about women and finance, because I'd always had an interest, because I am a woman in finance, I guess. And also, I realized that most of the messages in the industry were really strange when it came to the topic of women and money. Everything I read, whether it was on a bank website or some sort of any kind of internet page from a research firm, everything was negative. Things like women don't take risk, and women aren't interested in investing, and women maybe want to give the authority to their husband or their dad to do the investing because maybe they don't know how. This type of stuff. And for me, that was such a huge disconnect, because with my day-to-day work as a portfolio manager, I always had many female clients as well as male clients, and my female clients were always strong, capable, confident investors. I didn't really see any difference between the genders. So I wondered, why were all these messages so negative about women? And I thought, how am I going to change these messages for the next generation? Because why would anyone want to go into finance? And how were women going to learn to invest if they thought they weren't supposed to and they shouldn't take risks? And how were they going to proceed if they were going to listen to all these stereotypes? So I was waiting for someone to change the world, and I decided it better be me, because I was so mad, I thought, I'm going to start doing my own research. So it was really this kind of anger that propelled me to do this research. That's how it all started. And I committed to 1 year. I thought, what I'm going to do is try to find some really strong, capable women and get them to share their stories. And then I would write one research paper and release it on International Women's Day. So I went around the world and I interviewed 50 what I call very smart women, people that were successful, people who had great stories that they could share. And I quoted them all. And so all of these white papers that I've written, I'm on my 9th this year that I'm working on, they're all on my website, which is barbarastewart.ca. And if you're interested in reading some positive, inspirational stories, I really encourage you to do that. So that's what rich thinking research is about and how it evolved. And all it is every year me interviewing 50 new women. They're not women that work in finance. They're women from diverse ages, diverse professions, diverse industries, with their stories about money. And I'm going to share the highlights of my findings today. And I'm also going to share what I'm seeing around the world so that you can get a feel for some of the really cool stuff that's happening in the world of women in finance. Now, this is, of course, the biggest trend, wealth next generation stuff, we know that the female customer is the #1 market globally today, target market. She's earning more money, she's controlling more money, she's planning to earn even more money, she's got stock options, she's going to sell her company to Google. Believe me, this woman is our customer in just about whatever business we're in today. So I hope from today, if you get nothing else, learn how women communicate a little bit differently, learn how women behave a little bit differently. So no matter what business you're in, if you have a female customer, hopefully you'll be able to do more business with her. So one thing I need to tell you is, remember, this is research. It's qualitative research, not quantitative research. However, because I've now interviewed about almost 700 women around the world over the last 9 years, I would have to argue that the themes I've uncovered are now statistically significant, because that's a lot of numbers, 700. So when I talk to you, these aren't my personal opinions. These are what the collective voice of 700 women have shared with me. So you can, I think, trust this information. And of course, it has become my personal opinion as well. It had to influence me along the way. So today, 65% of household wealth is in the 65 plus category. So older people have a lot of money. Now, when these people were growing up in the generation of the Depression or World War II, they didn't have a lot of money, and they felt very fortunate if they owned their own home. But in 2018, these older people, this significant part of the population, they bought these homes for tens of thousands of dollars, and now they're selling them for $1 million. So guess what? They now have $1 million investment portfolio that needs to be managed. And a lot of these older people didn't grow up investing the same way a lot of women didn't grow up investing. And so what are they going to do? If they don't feel competent enough, or they don't feel they have the skills to invest that money, they'll pass it along to the next generation. So it becomes the responsibility of the next generation to help that parent manage that big investment portfolio. So I call this daughter care, because daughters seem to do most of the elder care. This is well documented. So daughters are going to end up running 1 million plus investment portfolios quite often, because women live longer. It's usually that parent that's left. So our customers become the daughters as well as the women that are out there today. So this is why we all need to worry about this, understanding better what matters to these women. I'll tell you, my first survey that I did in 2010, all I did was ask women, how did you learn about money when you were growing up? Think about that for yourself. How did you learn about money when you were growing up? Interestingly, 73% of the women interviewed, this was 1,000 women across Canada, my first survey, my only survey, 73% of them learned from informal instruction from other people, like parents, like friends, mom's sister, whatever. Just little stories that somebody would tell them about money. Or they learned from informal instruction, sometimes by making mistakes with money. What they didn't do was read boring investment textbooks or go to boring investment courses. That really wasn't very effective, and most women just weren't interested in learning that way. So I found out clearly that the women that were very successful and confident managing their wealth had learned about money through somebody telling them a story about money, some sort of pivotal moment, like somebody sitting them down, a friend of a friend, and saying, you know, you might need to look at that neighborhood to live in. How much money do you think you need to earn in that neighborhood? What kind of job do you think you'll need when you grow up? Giving them a real good conversation about it. So these were the sort of life-shaping moments for women. And so, for example, I'll share with you some of the interviews I've done. There's so many. This fellow, and I do interview men as well, not every year, but some years, because I think it's really important, because they also have female customers, right? John Hagel is co-chairman of Deloitte Center for the Edge in San Jose. John talked to me about he feels the feminine communication style is critical for everyone in business. And he talks about masculine and feminine archetypes. The masculine archetype is all about money. numbers. The feminine archetype is also about money, but we will first step back and say, why should I care in the first place? And that's the difference. Deborah McLaughlin is president of a strategy marketing firm in Toronto. She was recently hired by Canadian Broadcasting Corporation to try to help them figure out how can they up the viewership for the Olympic Games. Believe it or not many people watch the Olympic Games on television. I would have thought the numbers were higher. So they hired her to do research to find out how can we engage people and get them to watch the Olympic Games. It turned out that they were able to engage people if they shared stories about the Olympic sites, the history of the sites, stories about the athletes' lives, what went on, why were they doing the sport. Everybody loves to hear that about people, and it's no different with the women I interviewed and how they learned about financial matters. In 2013, I interviewed 100 women that year. That was a bit too hectic, actually. And I asked them only one question. I usually only ask one question because it's open-ended. How are you investing your resources? How are you investing your personal resources of time, energy, and money? Think about that for yourself right now. Just sitting here. How are you investing your time, energy, and your money? What jumps to mind? Probably something. What was interesting is that at least half of the women I interviewed told me they're spending money or time or energy right now on stuff that matters to them today. They're not waiting until they're old and gray and sort of saving everything for that long, far off day when they retire. That word retirement is being seriously questioned because a lot of women are passionate about their causes and the concerns that matter to them today. And this is important, of course, for all industries. In fact, a quarter of the women I interviewed said they're spending their money on a business that either they're starting or one that a friend is starting because it's something that they're really passionate about. For example, Narina Visar, she's on the board of CFA Institute in South Africa, and I went to speak there a couple of years ago. And I quoted her. She said, I love to invest in projects where I'm helping people who need access to capital. This kind of message I heard over and over again from so many women. They want to help other people with their projects because it matters. So if you learn nothing else today, this is probably the number one thing. Of course, women learn through stories, but women also prefer to invest in causes and concerns. Money and meaning are not separate for women. So one of the biggest myths in the investment industry is risk tolerance, which I've written a lot about. And, you know, we all know that the female population, the broader female population, has long been underinvested in the traditional equity markets. And so the traditional asset mix, of course, of any investor is cash, bonds, stocks, real estate. But I wrote an article for CFA, if you're interested in this, on female asset mix. With the female asset mix, there's a lot more going on because women, again, are looking at, should I put a bunch of my money in my own business or my friend's business? Or maybe I'm going to buy something aspirational, which means something that I really am kind of dreamy about, something that really I want in the future, and I'm going to invest something in that today. So the important thing here is if you're advising a female customer, remember that her definition of investing is much broader than the traditional asset mix. She's not talking about the S&P 500. It's not just the S&P 500. It's everything else in her life. It's all about that. So if you would like a woman to invest in either your idea or invest in a product or invest in a portfolio, whatever it is, don't do this. This is the old way of communicating with a woman, and it's still around, and you know what? These people aren't making much money because it's an ineffective style of communicating with a woman. This style is just, you know, what's to think about? Stocks outperform bonds over the long term. Why aren't you just putting your money in the stock market? It's obvious. The issue is, women care about causes and concerns that matter to them, and they're not so worried about a 3.5% return versus a 3.8% return. It's just not that relevant. So to get them to invest, we need a new style. And that style is very simple. Gloria Steinem told us about it a long time ago, and I've forgotten what her exact quote is, but it's, don't think about making women fit the world, make the world fit women, that type of thing, right? So have a more holistic conversation with a woman. Find out what's truly of interest to her, find out what motivates her, and then you can sell her something. But don't waste your time trying to sell her something or get her to invest in something before you've taken the time to find out what truly matters to her. So what motivates her? This is important. And I've done a lot of research and interviews on this. So this is another, great lady, what's her name? Diana von Furstenberg. So throughout my travels and conversations over the years, the idea of financial independence has always been a huge thing with women anywhere that I go, any culture. But I would say that in 2018, financial independence has become the dominant theme across the board. And what I mean by that, it's this idea of I make my own money. I make my own decisions. Great. So give you an example. I met with Cheryl Rayson. She's a New York partner of one of the largest law firms, their biotech practice. I love this quote. Cheryl said, "My father ingrained in me and my sister the need for what he inelegantly called FU money." So this is money that allows you to walk away from a bad situation. Whether it's a bad boss, whether it's a bad relationship, whatever it is, you've got your pile of FU money, you can walk away. In other words, it's about money that gives you freedom. Doesn't everybody want that? And picking up on this theme of financial independence are most brands that get it today. And so you may or may not have heard of Wealthsimple. They're based in Canada, and they've just expanded to the UK. They're kind of taking over from a lot of the bank business right now because they're a younger person's social trading platform. They charge minimal amounts, which is, of course, the trend for operating online trading. But look at their tagline. It's in white, so it's hard to see, but it's take care of yourself. And there's two women. So this is a firm that totally understands my research and what's going on today. Take care of yourself is, yeah, I want to have freedom, and I want to have my FU money. So another big thing that I've learned over the years is this. Don't believe those stereotypes that women are risk averse. That's not true. Women, in fact, are risk aware. And you might think that's a subtle difference in language, but I really believe that subtle differences in language matter just as much as overt ones. Why put out a negative messages when in fact it's a positive messages? Women might take longer to make an investment decision. They'll probably do more homework, but they will make a very calculated decision, and they will take calculated risks. And that's a good thing. I got pretty obsessed with that idea of risk, actually, and last year I did a whole study on it. And the reason I was so obsessed was I've worked as a portfolio manager for a long time, and we all have those questionnaires about risk and return. And, you're supposed to tick off a box of your risk tolerance. And 90% of people just say they're conservative. They don't spend more than a second thinking about it. Of course, I don't want to take a lot of risk. I'm just, the average kind of person. That's how much risk I want in my investment portfolio. But that's really dangerous, especially if investment advisors are biased and following stereotypes about risk and women, because they might guide you to fewer equities in a portfolio, or fewer equity-like things that will actually help grow a woman's money. The implications are so serious for not spending more time thinking and educating people about risk tolerance. So a way to get at it is by looking at people's past experiences and broadening the conversation around risk so that you know more about the personality, more about how they've behaved in the past, and then you can really make a serious judgment about what is their real risk tolerance, and then educate them if it's too low, what are the implications of that? Not just accepting this little tick on a box that they're average like everybody else. It's far too serious. So I thought long and hard about what questions could we ask clients and potential clients to get at these past experiences. And this ended up being an amazing year. I asked 3 questions. What is the biggest risk you've taken in your life? Think about that. Everybody. Doesn't matter if it's financial. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken? You know what it is. Sometimes it's really personal. What's the biggest risk you've ever taken? Why did you take that risk? And what happened? Yikes. I'm not going to ask any of you, but I'll share some of this. So what I learned by asking 50 women last year those 3 questions, that clearly risk is a moving target. It changes sometimes based on people's mood that day. It really is based on a complex combination of factors. As time passes, our risk tolerance can change. As past experiences unfold, we can become more confident, way more confident in some cases, the more practice we get doing anything. This is Diane Garnick. She's based in New York, and she's the chief income strategist at a big pension fund. And I talked to Diane about what was the biggest risk she'd taken and all of that. And she said something important, that, what people think is going to make them happy one day changes over time. Sounds so obvious, but our definition of happiness today might be different 2 years ago, depending on life events or any number of things. So why do we care about this? We care because if we have clients that we're helping to invest, or if we are investing ourselves, we need to understand that we need to review our risk tolerance on a regular basis, at a minimum every few months, because our lives change that quickly. The other thing is, of course, very key, is what's risky to one person isn't necessarily risky to another. Some people would rather die than talk like this in front of people, right? Took me a long time to feel comfortable with that. Some people are just happy to, jump in the deep end, do whatever. We're all so different. So the thing there is we cannot make assumptions about our customers, whatever business we're in. Don't assume that what's risky to you is risky to all women or all men. I spoke with Anne Sheehan. She's a Vodafone in Ireland, telecom exec. And I asked her, what was the biggest risk you've taken in your life? And she told me a funny story. She said she was on a panel talking about diversity, just like we're doing here all day. And this is in Dublin. And she was on the panel with a couple of men and a couple of women. And this man stood up and said something about, well, the reason we need diversity is for the economic payoff, because, it matters in business, because the economic consequences of diversity are important to our business. And she decided to stand up and say, okay, so basically you're saying if there isn't a payoff that's financial, we should continue to oppress women. Is that what you're saying? Which is obviously a fairly bold thing to stand up and say. But she did it, and she did it because she felt it was really important. These were her deep-rooted values, and she wanted to make a difference. And we'll get back to that. Meredith, some of you may have read her book. It's called Women of the Street. She's had a history of being a hedge fund manager, and then she decided to write a book how female hedge fund managers have returns that are as good, if not better than, male investment managers. And when I asked Meredith the biggest risk she'd ever taken in her life, it was publishing the book. She wrote the book, and then she went into a state of complete and utter panic, which you might appreciate, because if you've been working in the hedge fund industry and 95% of your peers are male, and you're about to put out this book that makes it look like, what the heck do you know? Well, you're going to say something completely opposite to your peer group. That's pretty tough. She ended up overcoming her fear, published the book. It's done very well, and she speaks all over the world, including for many CFA institutes now. And actually, I encourage you to follow her on Twitter. She's really funny, and she just did a TED Talk about women and investing as well. But again, her risk had to do with something that mattered to her very, very deeply. So it wasn't so much a financial risk. So what is risk? I think most people think in the investment industry that risk is about short-term volatility, this kind of stuff in the stock market. Oh God, that's risky. But the stock market has always been volatile, and the stock market will always be volatile. So again, we've got to broaden this conversation. And so I think that risk is much more about, have we achieved our long-term objectives, or are we on plan to achieve our long-term objectives? If we're not on plan to achieve our long-term objectives, that's pretty risky. That's when we're really in trouble. So this is a Facebook guy, you probably know him well, Mark Zuckerberg. His quote, before the stock fell 20%, this is from a while ago, his quote is, "The biggest risk is not taking any risk." And I would like to say yes, and also for a woman, the biggest risk is falling into the trap of believing stereotypical information about risk. Because if you believe, or your advisor falls into the stereotype, you're going to be underinvested in equities. You're not going to be able to have enough money to survive your lifetime, possibly. Cash is the lowest performing asset class over time. Short-term bonds don't do much better in this environment. It's really serious if a woman follows stereotypical advice and is underinvested in the equity market. So, coming back to how do we get more information about people and their risk tolerance? This question also turns out to be really good to provoke that conversation. Why did you take the risk that you took? So some examples. I went to Sao Paulo for the first time last year. That was really fun. I met with this woman, Fernanda Feitosa. She had been a very successful lawyer, but her big dream, her whole life, was to open an art gallery. And she finally, with the support of her husband, emotional support more, he just said, look, you've been dreaming about this and talking about this for years. Quit your job, do it. It was obviously a huge endeavor, but the great story is she's now got 10,000 visitors a year and 140 galleries at this art fair in Sao Paulo, and she's just loving her life. So she's actually living the big dream that she had, which was not anything she was even qualified to do. So why did she take that risk? Because she had the big dream, and most of us have some big dream or another. This lady in Singapore is amazing. She was on the cover of Forbes, under 30. At age 23, Pocket Sun, that really is her name, and she's about the size of something you could put in your pocket, actually. She's so cute. Anyway, she said she was looking at the stats that 94% of venture capital funding goes to men, and only 2.2% to female CEOs, and she just felt completely appalled, and she thought, in my lifetime, I'm going to change this. She was personally affected, and she decided at age 23, I'm going to disrupt the venture capital industry. And she's doing it. That's another person to follow on Twitter. I don't know what her handle is, but just Google Pocket Sun. She's been on the cover of lots of things, lots of stories. I got to meet her. I mean, she became famous within a year of deciding that this needed to happen and that she wanted to be involved in it. So I guess you're catching the theme of this type of passion, and what's meaningful to a woman is going to make her invest. The last example I'll give you on this is a Canadian one, Kim Shannon. She runs an investment firm. They have about $5 billion under management. A couple years into it, she had a very strong performance track record. Things were going really well. And her major client asked her to reduce her fees. And there was no basis for this other than they happened to know they represented 90% of her revenues. She had too much money with one client. So she felt this was ridiculous. Her track record was as good as anybody else's in the industry. Why would I suddenly reduce my fees? And it wasn't an insignificant amount they were asking. It was something like a 40% reduction in fees. So she went away and thought, oh God, what do I do? Because I want to keep going with my business. She loved it. It was going well. And she just decided with a couple of her teammates, and they were a small team, our integrity matters too much. We can't reduce our fees. We don't deserve to have our fees reduced. So they fired their major client that represented 90% of their revenues. Can you imagine? That's pretty bold. And so, of course, what happened is 2 weeks later, the big client came back and said, well, actually, okay, we'll just stay with things the way they are. And she said, no, nope, don't trust you anymore, don't want to do business with you anymore. Went on, got a bunch of new clients, took a long time. She now has a 50% women on staff, very successful firm in Canada. But again, the message of all of these women is if they feel strongly about something and it's all about their values, then they will take huge risk and something that means something to them. So I'm pretty geeky, and I came up with my own formula, and it's this: propensity to invest for a smart woman. If a woman's interested in a product or an idea or an investment, and it's aligned with their values, they've got to have both, then they will take risk and invest. So this is for anybody selling to a woman. I can't stress this enough. So risk, another thing I learned, is completely relative. It's relative to so much. It's relative to your experience in life, the culture around you, personality, education, what's going on in your life situation that day, that month, any environment. What I don't think risk tolerance or risk is about is gender. I'm pretty convinced it doesn't have much to do with whether you're a man or a woman. One thing where I think there might be a slight gender skew is this. I find that women prepare more. If I look at the numbers from the amount of interviews I've done and I look at who said what, about 65% of the women I talk to I would put in the category of preparers versus people who just jump off the cliff and take the risk. And so this is why we tend to be perfectionists as women. We're looking to make sure we know absolutely everything before we're going to make the investment. It's not necessarily bad, except that it can cause a bit of paralysis. But that's the thing about women will probably take longer to make a decision, and you may need to kind of move them along a little bit faster. For example, this woman I met in Montreal is an air traffic controller, which is something I care a lot about because I travel all the time. And it was actually a fascinating conversation to have with somebody who does that job. And I found out something important, which is that the failure rate for the air traffic controller course is 90%. So you think CFA is bad? This is worse. So, I mean, a 2-year course and there's a 10% chance you're going to pass. What a commitment. Unbelievable. But she said that she just loves certainty. She wants to know that if she does A, then B is going to happen. So she's one of these perfect examples of a woman who likes to prepare, which is a very good thing in an air traffic controller, obviously. So this is what we like. We like fine print, stuff like that. And the women that said they were leapers, the 35% that were more leapers, I tried to put them in 2 categories. They said that they went more with their gut feel and that, you know, they hadn't spent too much time thinking about following their big dream or whatever their big risk was. They just kind of went with their gut. But I had an interesting feeling about this once I talked to a few people. And back to this same woman we saw before, Cheryl Rayson in New York, when I asked her about whether she planned or was a leaper, she said, you know, she always thought it was important to be financially independent. And she was a securities lawyer specializing in health and medicine, a specialty area that hadn't existed when she started. The more she talked, the more I realized, even though she was telling me she jumps based on gut feel, she'd kind of been planning her entire life, this extremely perfect career, in my view, and she'd taken like every single step along the way to get to the big job. So I started thinking, I really do think women in general are planners. I'd be prepared to make that observation. What do we do with that information? If women are planners, if we're investment advisors, we want to make sure that we don't just advise them to put 30% in bonds and 60% in stocks. We want to make sure that they understand the overall plan where does this investment allocation fit in with their overall plan? Because they want to plan. Planning is important. I'm going to talk about one quantitative thing that I think is really important, and then I'll stop for a second to see if anybody has any questions. So the media, and I love the media, and they've been really good circulating my research, sharing it, and writing stories about it. One thing that bugs me that still seems to be out there is that everybody talks about women being more conservative and all of that stuff that I've been blathering on about. 5 things that women and men investors want came out. The source is Capital Group in the fall of 2017. If we look at the 5 things, they want conservative investments, funds that cushion losses, funds that beat the market, investments that promote opportunity for women, minorities, LGBT, or investments that promote health and wellness. If we look at these, women are the orange and men are the gray. These 3, the ones that get talked about all the time in the media, women being conservative, you're talking about a 1 or 2 point difference between men and women. It's almost the same exact thing, but these things get all the airtime, and these are forming all the stereotypes, in my view. The 2 things that really matter, where you can see there's difference of like 15 to 20 points between men and women on the top 2, women prefer to invest in causes and concerns that matter to them. It's a big deal. And they want to promote health and wellness. I did some corporate consulting work for a big bank in the Nordics last year, and I interviewed 60 ultra high net worth women on the topic of ESG, which I'm sure you're familiar with. I think it was 92% of them would prefer to invest in an ESG type of fund versus any other fund, even if it had higher fees associated with it, and even if, as myth would have it, it had lower returns. It turns out that they are a higher volatility. Women totally prepared to take the risk because they wanted to invest in something sustainable that would save the world. No issue. So I have a bunch of trends in how smart women invest globally that I'd like to share with you. But before that, because I want to take a little bit of water, I would like to hear from any of you if you have any questions, and if not, I'm going to ask you some questions for my own research. Do we have an extra mic? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the brilliant presentation. Actually, my question is about motivation. Once you know the person's motivation, what do you do next? Can you please give us some examples of real people whom you advised on financing? When you discovered their motivation, what did you do next?
That's a great question. I hope everybody heard it. Once you discover the motivation, what do you do next? And I'm not sure I have the answer. I think the answer is the important part is that you have the conversation and that you were asking these questions in the first place. Just the fact that you were asking those questions and having the conversation puts you about 1 million miles ahead of any competitor that you have, believe me, in either the investment industry or any industry. Because what you're forming then is a trusting relationship. Once somebody starts telling you what motivates them, the fact that if they tell you in the first place, you are already approachable and you are already in a relationship, and they are now holding this. And so you don't have to give any answer.
Good trick.
It's beautiful, but it's also, you're doing the person a service. I mean, it's not just, a sales tactic. It really does work because you might come up with an investment idea. I don't know what work you're in, but that actually does matter to them. That would be appropriate, I hope. Yes.
Yeah, if I might ask a question, in your researches, do you see that this strive women to invest? In your researches, do you see that this strive for women to invest in something socially responsible actually pays off? Because what I mean, I see I'm I graduated as from banking. at my university, and I see a bunch of my ex-classmates, female, they change their job for something which motivates them much more, for graphic designer, photographer, whatever, working with teenagers, whatever, but not in finance. And basically when they were looking for the job, they were looking for aspirations. It doesn't mean it financially it works out well. So what about those investors, of those women? Because being driven by good thoughts is a good thing, but financially.
That's a great point, and
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm not necessarily advocating for ESG funds here. I'm telling you what my research shows, and this again is a way to broaden the conversation. So the job of the investment advisor isn't over. Now that you know they're interested in ESG, that's where the job starts. This is about know your client. And so you get to know your client, you understand what they're interested in, what they're motivated in. That doesn't mean you sell them that thing, especially if you don't think it's appropriate for them in the context of their overall situation. So then you get into, well, if we did that, how would that affect your future planning? What would your portfolio look like down the road? Again, it opens up another conversation. Your job is to educate the client as well. So you might not say no, or maybe we'll put a smaller allocation to ESG because I know it matters to you, or maybe there's some other way you could access having an investment that matters to you. It could be private equity, it could be something else. But it all needs to be appropriate in the context of a diversified portfolio, of course. It's always back to that, and it's always the bigger discussion. But yeah, you don't want somebody to just 100% latest ESG fund just because my heart says so. No, that's part of the job, right? Anybody else with anything? Okay, so what I'd like to do is take 7 or 8 minutes. One of the things that I've been working on is things to do with events. I've done a lot of research, particularly in the Nordics and in Southeast Asia, and I'd like to get a flavor for Eastern Europe. And so here you are, if you don't mind, answer some questions by maybe raising hands. Comments are welcome. So what I have found, particularly in these other environments, are things are changing around the types of events. This is for female investors, but if you're male, feel free, because you will know perhaps what female investors, if you're working with them, would want in the Ukraine. There's a movement kind of away from huge events. Like we had a pretty big event this morning, and now we're in the smaller room where it's a little bit more intimate. There were so many big splashy events and a lot of money put into it, and especially with women in finance over the last few years. And so my research has shown that women would prefer now to have a smaller, more intimate, what we call financial salon. So something that's usually is smaller than us, like 12 or 14 women that really want to go into detail about a topic that matters to them again, so taking this meaning thing a bit further, having maybe a recurring meeting, like on a monthly basis, where they would talk about possibly something to do with family finances, or maybe something to do with how to buy an apartment or teaching their children things, any number of topics, but they want to be kind of in a smaller, more intimate group, certainly no product sales and no bank facilitator, but where they could actually discuss between each other on a regular basis, and in some cases have it carried on into an online community where they could continue to talk to each other. Seems to be a trend in the Nordics. I'm curious if either that's happening here already. Do you think it would work? Do you think people would like that in terms of female investors? Any comment? Well, let's go by a show of hands. Does anybody think that format of the smaller discussion would resonate with female investors here? Okay, so we got at least half. Does anybody have a reason why they think it wouldn't? Any comments? Have you seen it?
I can make a similar comment.
Yeah.
Because I had in my library like 4 or 3 different groups of females, just why I'm thinking that this idea would work much better, because I recall some financial information which I got not from my professional stuff but somewhere else. For example, there were, the group of girls in my Viber. I have like 3 or 4 groups of females with which we constantly cooperate. And it's usually, I met them at some totally diverse circumstances. So it can be dance classes, it can be, I don't know, some psychology classes, it can be some other totally finance unrelated classes, but that's something that we regularly communicate, and we are rather quite well organized, and we discuss a lot of different topics along the road. So if you need, I don't know, health advice, or I don't know, fashion advice, whatever it can be, travel advice, you usually will turn to this small group of
Does it
girls
include
that you know.
financial?
Yes.
Well, okay, amazing.
Yes.
Okay, is anybody else seeing that kind of thing?
So I can. What I want to say is that I do see the tendency of women to cooperate in small groups and be really helpful to each other.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to remember that. I don't need to write it down. Thank you.
I would like to comment here because I think there could be a difference related to the age. So let's say more young women, even I see that younger women than I am are more open, like to discuss different questions like personal, financial, and so on. And when it gets to more older women, and especially women 40 plus, they are not get used to communicate very sensitive personal information, which is like families and finance. They can do this like with close friends, maybe 1 or 2, but it could be more difficult for them to communicate such sensitive information with 10, 12 people. This is
Sorry,
my personal view.
one clarification, and that'll get to you. If it was, say, a cause, like something going on in the community or something that they could invest in that you think they would all be very interested in, do you think then the other generation, the older generation, would maybe do it?
Maybe like explaining the purpose of that and providing some educational also background to that, because not, I think, many women 40 plus really understand the investment industry itself. So maybe helping to understand the purpose for that will help, definitely.
Yeah.
So being the She Trades expert ambassador and previously working in a big corporation as the GM, so I can say that in Ukraine we had a trend where the women are investing only in their own business. So I never heard that the women are investing in some other's business, you know. So if they have any spare money, so they're investing in their own ideas, businesses, something like that. Second one, so estimation about women's business is mainly about very small businesses. So when I was the winner, for example, in Liverpool, among 168 countries, with the demand more than $1 million investment to my project, so it's around 3 million. So the man's looking at me like a crazy lady. So even if they understand that I have a very high technological proposal and very big, you know, at the end profit level, so they look at me and say, "Are you really perceive that you can build that team for that?" So close to me, other 3 ladies who is from different countries, we won the other projects with the agricultural, you know, handmaking, something like that, or women's business, beauty business. So it's okay. It was 100K, like 10K, it's okay. When we are talking about millions, so the guys especially, they are first asking, who will be in your team? Can you show me the man who will manage that team? With all the background, you know? So that's a not only Ukrainian issue, that's international community business that, okay, so if you start doing that, so who is your partner in that case? So that's my personal experience, and in that case, of course, from the point of supporting each other, I would like to say that, yes, really, so in our community, critical point is not he has to support she, no, she has to support she. This is our issue. In international community, the perception still is the woman, if she is building big business, it has to be the partner from man, and they have to demonstrate that the team will be built mainly by men if you're talking about millions and upscale business.
Thank you. This is really good. Anybody else on that topic? Okay, my next question then, because there's lots of men and women in this room, which is great, and in the bigger area, this is a great environment in terms of where I've spoken around the world. I'd say this is the most gender equal CFA audience I've ever spoken to, so bravo, bravo. What about men and women in the same events, whether they're the smaller events or really big events? In this culture, obviously, it's working today. Does anybody have anything they can share with me? Is this new? How did it come about? Why did, can maybe a man tell me, why are you here? I mean, not on Earth, but, you know. Any man? Go ahead. Why did you attend a mixed event? Okay.
Hi, my name is Maya, and I'm from Croatia. So I'm not maybe representative of Ukraine, but I have to say I'm a little bit surprised by these questions because, you know, I work in asset management, and most of our events are like this. So. Probably because we talked about it a lot this morning, and we concluded that the reason for this is that we have a good mix of women and men in the workplace, not at the top level, of course, but we do have a good mix, and we do not feel so, you know, oppressed. The reason for that is that we have this long culture of women working, because you know, we had very good childcare. I know communism wasn't very good, and I'm not going to talk about that, but we had, for 70 years, women had very good childcare, and it was obligated for them to work. So we interacted a lot, and the same thing is today. We do not feel the differences. They get paid more, that's the... Still, yes, they get 15% higher pay, but, you know, saying mixed event, it's pretty weird in Croatia because most of them are mixed. Even in my industry, which is, you know, we are more divided, asset managers are mostly men and administrative side is mostly women, but the events are usually mixed, sometimes even hire women. So
different
that's
everywhere I
Croatian
go.
experience.
It's fascinating. Ukraine experience, anyone want to comment on that? This is normal? Can we just leave it at that? Mixed event normal? Okay, because that's what I'm going to say. Okay, last question that I'm curious about, let me just remind myself, is, yes, this idea of continuing with an online community. Do you have trading platforms? Do people use social trading platforms? And if so, is there one dominant social trading platform? And how many people here trade online? Not many? Okay. For those people who are aware of social trading platforms, what would be the main social trading platform here? Okay, but like where you do stock trades or maybe share your portfolios? No?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
This market is very underdeveloped in Ukraine, and basically it just recently has become legal to do so.
Oh, I was wondering about
Yes.
that. Okay, thank you. This helps me enormously. Okay, so I'm going to, with that, share what I'm seeing around the world and maybe what's coming here any day now. So let me do that. Trends, okay. So at a macro level, obviously everybody's talking about AI and machine learning and blockchain and all of that stuff. And I'm not going to talk about that because everybody's talking about that. But specifically when it comes to women and finance, technology and social media in particular has definitely changed everything. And so what we're seeing now, and I'll show you a bunch of different examples of this, is that women are using these online trading platforms to share investment ideas. Even gamification is being used. And it's really building a level of confidence. It's it's a very quick way to move up the learning curve if you do not have the right level or what you want to be in terms of your investment education. And the other thing that's going on globally is there's this sort of really big shift in socialization where, especially with the younger women, the investing is becoming cool. And when it's cool, of course, you're going to all your friends are doing it, and they're, encouraging each other to use these social trading platforms. And so this can change really rapidly here, I'm sure, because I've seen all this. Because, amazing things are happening. So social media has led to crowdsourcing, and crowdsourcing's led to crowdfunding, and crowdfunding has led to the democratization of capital. And that's the cool thing for women, because women tend to turn around if they have capital. They will use the capital to connect and to create things and to transform things. And so this is really huge, not only statistically, as I talked about this morning on the panel, but whether women are trying to organize anything, whether it's an event or solve a problem in a community, women are just huge users of social media, and it matters. So, because with women, it's all about relationships and connections. And even when it comes to investment opportunities, we want to have a relationship to something that we're investing in. And so it has to resonate with us personally. It has to really engage us. And then, of course, women want to share their positive investing stories with other women, either via social media or just together as friends. The other thing, it's not just the women themselves. Brands understand that we need access to the women's networks because that's very powerful. The most powerful sales tool is, of course, a personal referral. So social media has changed the way that we inform ourselves about stocks and bonds, and the way we communicate and share investment ideas, and the way that we find our investment advisors. This is coming soon. So SAS, or SAS, a global software firm, did a big study called The Influential Advocate, and it's about finding the BFF, the best friend forever, for women. So if you can access the women's network, you're way, way ahead. Because just like people go on Yelp or Google to find the restaurant, like here I am in Ukraine, and my husband and I will figure out where we're going tonight. We're going to look at comments and things like that. That's how we're going to find our investment advisors in the future. Why wouldn't it be the same? So this is what I was talking about with this financial salon sort of idea that is taking hold in many parts of the world. And depending on the topic of interest, I think it can be very powerful, sort of a throwback, but very powerful. This is an example. I was asked by CFA Singapore a few years ago to go to Singapore, and something like this. It was a very unusual event. I'd never been to Singapore. I was given the address, and I was being picked up by a taxi, and I assumed I was going to a hotel ballroom with my PowerPoint and all of this. And we drove up to somebody's home, and I was asked to take off my shoes. That's what I was telling you earlier. And I was terrified because, I didn't have my slides. I've got bare feet. It ended up being one of the most effective events I've ever been part of. There were a lot of young women that were really ambitious and motivated and wanted to learn, and we ended up talking for hours in this woman's home. So this is me with just my notes, and you can't see my feet, but everybody had bare feet. So it's quite interesting. So that type of thing is quite effective. In terms of trading platforms, this woman, Jane Barrett, used to be head of a global advertising agency in New York, and I spoke with her a few years ago about how bad the investment industry, about all the lingo we have and the jargon that we use, and nobody understands what we're talking about. And I said, I really think it's going to take someone from outside our investment industry to change the way that we communicate inside the investment industry. And interestingly, Jane decided to leave her job and founded this platform called hellogoldbean.ca. I think it's still up and running. She charges $50 a month. It's open to anyone to do as many trades as you like, and there's practice and how to learn about investing. And it's modern, clear communication that anyone can follow. So it's very different from the traditional way that we communicate in the industry. And I just found out 2 weeks ago she's already sold this. It's only been 2 years. She just sold it to a fintech firm, and now she's moved her whole family to Salt Lake City. So good for her, but it might still be up. I think it's hellogoldbean.ca if you want to check it out. It's interesting. In Canada, Volio is a startup. This is based on the concept of investment clubs. So you get together with your old MBA class or maybe your family or friends, and you all put your money into the same investment portfolio. And it will share what your performance is from your stock picks, what your uncle's performance is, so nobody can hide anymore and saying, you know, I made this much money on this stock or not. Everybody knows whose stock picks worked and what the overall team did. But it's a great way to learn how to trade, to learn about money, because the best way is to use real money, not all your money, but to practice online is a fabulous tool. And in fact, with any of my serious investment clients, I always encourage them to open up a small trading account just to get practice. Buy any stocks. This is a Tasty Trade in Chicago. I met the CEO there, Christy Ross. Idea is it's options, so it's a very sophisticated trading site, but they're bringing it down to everyday language. And again, it's a great example. You can go and watch 8 hours a day of tutorials on how to trade options, but the people that are doing the tutorials look like Robin, and they talk in everyday language, so they make it very accessible and easy to watch, and so you can have an everyday person trading options. iFund Women out of New York was founded by Karen Cohn, who was in sales for Google, and she decided that the everyday woman should have access to capital, so she founded this crowdfunding site. And they do video tutorials, and they give coaching on how to do crowdfunding. It's fantastic. This is a lady in Istanbul. Now I've forgotten her name. Özlem Denizman. She's on a personal mission to change financial literacy levels in Turkey. So she's got this multimedia platform. She's got a TV show about money, radio show about money, Twitter chats about money, investment tips over Facebook. Unbelievable. This is probably the biggest thing happening globally is online investor education and incredibly easy to use websites. There's a natural demand for financial education around the world, and I think Poems is the best one that I've seen. This is based in Singapore. Check out these sites. My slides will be available for anybody so that you don't have to write all this stuff down. But you can learn, go to events online, and then they've got their trading platform. When I spoke in Singapore, they said 40% of the people in Singapore were using this Poems for online trading. And this site, it looks like a professional trading desk, and you can do it all from your laptop computer. And then in China, we've got Alipay and Alibaba. So on Alipay, you can go there, trade your stocks. You make your profit, trading profit. Screen pops up with a suggested thing you might want to buy at Alibaba, the shopping platform. So right away, with one click, you can spend the money that you earned from your trading profit. Boom, buying my new bag or whatever it is. Japan, very patriarchal culture. A lot of stay-at-home wives, but a lot of stay-at-home wives that are trading foreign currency during the day, believe it or not. 25% of the retail foreign currency market in Japan is these stay-at-home wives, these supposedly traditional women. It's fascinating. There's lots of stories on this if you want to research it. And with younger women too, it's quite amazing. They love to shop and they love to brag about how much money they're making with their foreign currency trades. So they'll take a picture of themselves with their new Prada bag and champagne and tweet everywhere about how much trading profit they made today. Share it with their friends. It's just good fun. And this lady started in Japan, Kiana Daniel. She's now based in New York. She went over to Japan from Iran when she was a young woman to study electrical engineering, and she was the only girl in her class. And to get through school, to finance her education, a friend taught her how to trade foreign currency. So it's a big thing in Japan for women. And so she's now got this site called, it's called Invest Diva, not that guy, Invest Diva, and that's also a really good site to look at. So she's inspiring, she's got women figuring out how to do trading, no problem. Now this guy. This is Tel Aviv, big for social trading. This is the world's largest social trading platform. It's called eToro. And one woman I know who's the former CEO of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange told me that everybody in Tel Aviv uses WeChat group app for trading. So families trade together on WeChat, which is amazing. And this is my favorite because I have a great story to go along with it. This is Shareville, which is the trading platform for Nordnet. Nordnet's the largest internet bank in Stockholm. And women, especially younger women, are sharing their investment portfolios. Sometimes they'll follow one woman who's the better performer, and they get followers like you do on social media. And they have Facebook groups where you can talk about stocks, all different levels. One group, Economista, has 87,000 followers. It's all talking stocks and women talking stocks. This is a true story. I spoke at an event for Nordnet in 2015. And at the end of it, I told all of these women, it was a pretty big event, now go out and buy a stock on this social trading platform. Get started, get investing, get practice. I was trying to inspire them. Buy a stock. Buy something that you're interested in. So Sandra was sitting in the audience, and she was an industrial engineer who had never invested in her life. And she said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go and buy some stocks, gender equality companies. I'm really interested in gender equality. That's what I'm going to do. But at the time, she couldn't find any gender equality funds because none existed. This is only 3 years ago. So she did her own research, and she bought 10 companies that all had gender equal management. And she followed the stocks on the social trading platform. And 2 years later, she had an investment return of plus 65% based on her 10 companies with gender equal management. She started tweeting about this, sharing it with everybody. She just wasn't shy about it was better than the S&P 500 over the 2-year period. And she still had her day job. And then Business Insider magazine heard about her, and they put her on the cover, and they wrote an article called The Swedish Amateur Who Has Outperformed the Market with Her Feminist Approach to Stock Picking. Amazing. And so she decided, actually I spoke with her a month ago, she has now left her job as an industrial engineer, and she put together this research platform, which, guess what, researches gender equal management in Sweden, and it's a ranking system that people can use. And so this is where I'm going to close, and I don't know what time it is, or we might have time for more questions, but these, in my view, are definitely the customers of the future, especially these younger women who are using these social trading platforms. So I'm expecting to see this type of revolution happen any day now here. So I think our job, whether we're in the investment industry or any industry, is to understand how these women think, how they behave, how they want to communicate, what matters to them, what's meaningful to them. And then we can align recommendations. And then women will be the most loyal customers you've ever had. That's the other thing. And I'll close there. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. This is me. If you would like to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. I love people who send me notes with ideas about research or things that you think it's important that I look at. Anything to do with women and money. I write for CFA Institute blog, Enterprising Investor, about every month. But yeah, keep in touch with me, and any ideas you have are welcome. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.